We all know that wars are deadly and violent and can bring out the best in people and the very worst. It is a time of immense emotional and physical suffering, leaving nothing but scarred bodies, scarred minds, and scarred landscapes. It is during this intense period that strange and unexplainable events happened, of which there was no explanation. The following are 5 strange stories from World War I that to this day leave experts baffled. Number 5. Saved by his dead brother. On April 1917, Corporal Will Bird, a soldier in the 42nd Battalion of the Canadian Black Watch, was fast asleep on the dirt floor of a dugout at Vimy Ridge in the Nord-Pas-de-Calais region of France. Bird suddenly woke to a pair of hands gently shaking him, which he first thought to be those of a fellow soldier, but upon opening his eyes, he was instead greeted by his brother, Steve, who had died while serving with the Canadian Expeditionary Force in France in a battle a couple of years earlier. The dead brother then urgently beckoned Will to follow him, which he did. He followed the apparition of his brother over the scorched, bombed-out moonscape of no man's land until they reached the remains of a destroyed building on the fringes of the battlefield. At this point, his dead brother took a long, thoughtful look at Will and then vanished into thin air. Scared and bewildered, Will did not have the energy to make his way back to his dugout and decided to spend the night in the ruins. When he awoke a few hours later, he started his journey back to his group, but when he arrived, he found a bombed-out shell where the dugout had been and body parts of his unit strewn all about. There was nothing left of them. No one had survived, except Will, whose dead brother had awoken him to take him to safety. Later in life, Bird wrote a book about his experiences called Ghosts Have Warm Hands. Number 4. Vanished Battalions of Gallipoli. In 1915, a coalition of British, Australian and New Zealand troops were deployed at Gallipoli on the Dardanelles in Turkey in an attempt to take the Turks out of the war. Amongst the coalition fighters were 250 soldiers and 16 officers from the Royal Norfolk Regiment. This fighting group was composed of servants, grooms and gardeners from the British Royal Family Estate at Sandringham in Norfolk. On August the 12th, 1915, when they found themselves under heavy enemy fire, the Royal Norfolk Regiment was ordered to advance against the Turks. By this stage, the troops were tired, hungry, thirsty and sick, and in the fog of battle made a mistake and headed in the wrong direction, and in doing so became separated from the larger 163rd Brigade that they were part of. Once they realised their mistake, for some strange reason, they continued to advance against the Kavak Tepe Ridge, despite having no support or reinforcements. They had now become sitting ducks, and some of the men were immediately gunned down by machine gun fire and picked off by snipers, both on the ridge and up in the trees. However, against all odds, the remainders of the Norfolk Regiment continued to charge forward under heavy fire and were able to push back the enemy towards the forest, which by them was engulfed in flames from the artillery fire. The regiment continued to charge into the burning forest and would vanish into history, never to be seen again. This brave act would immortalise the Royal Norfolk Regiment. There were many questions asked as to what actually happened to those brave souls, because there appears to be no remains of the soldiers, and when the British government made numerous inquiries as to the whereabouts of the Norfolk Regiment, the Turkish government claimed that they were definitely not taken prisoner and denied any knowledge of them. Number 3. What happened to the USS Cyclops? When the USS Cyclops disappeared somewhere north of Barbados, it became one of the most popular examples of the dangers lurking within the Bermuda Triangle. The USS Cyclops was the first of 4 Proteus-class ships built for the United States Navy in the years preceding World War I. Shortly after March 4th, 1918, the ship and a crew of 306 disappeared off the face of the Earth in the Bermuda Triangle. To this day remains the single largest loss of life in US naval history, not involving direct combat. As it disappeared during a time of war, it was believed that she was captured or sunk by a German raider or U-boat because she was carrying 10,800 large tons of manganese ore used to produce munitions. But at the time, and in succeeding years, the German government has consistently denied that they had sunk the ship. On March 10, 1918, weather reports indicated that a violent storm had swept through the Virginia Cape area. It is believed that a combination of overload, engine troubles and bad weather led to the Cyclops sinking. What makes it all the more mysterious, according to the New York Times, was that the captain never sent a distress signal, nor did anyone aboard respond to radio calls by the hundreds of American ships in the vicinity. Official Navy history has stated that she probably sank in a violent storm. To this day, nobody knows the truth as to what really happened, and it remains a mystery. There have been many official naval theories as to its fate, but none have satisfactorily accounted for her disappearance. In a strange twist, the Cyclops had 2 sister ships called the Proteus and the Nereus, who both vanished in similar circumstances in World War II in the North Atlantic whilst transporting heavy ores, with the same theory and mystery as to how they sunk. Number 2. U-Boat U-65. U-Boat U-65 was launched in October 1916 in the shipyards of Bruges in Belgium. This boat seemed doomed from the beginning, when during its construction several workers were killed, and during the launching one officer fell overboard and was drowned. During its initial trial, the U-boat could not surface for 12 hours and no malfunction could be found. The following day, a torpedo exploded on deck, killing 6 crew members, including a second lieutenant. Later, a crewman saw the dead lieutenant board the U-boat and walked towards the bow. The lieutenant then stood at the bow with his arms crossed and stared at the crew. Some months later, his ghost was seen again on the U-boat, both by members of the crew and by the captain himself. Nothing more was seen of the ghost until a year later, when Master Gunner Eric Eberhardt claimed to have seen the ghost standing near a torpedo tube at the bow. The ghostly figure then brushed past him and then disappeared into thin air. A short time later, Eberhardt had died from a stab wound, apparently by his own hands. A couple of years later, the U-boat was spotted by an American crew when it was found wallowing on its side. The Americans were fearful about boarding the boat for fear that it might be booby-trapped and decided to destroy it, but at that point, it suddenly exploded. But shortly before this happened, the American crew reported seeing the figure of an officer standing on the vessel, arms folded across his chest. Number 1. The attack on Celtic Wood. At 5:20 a.m. on October the 9th, 1917, a patrol of 85 men of the 1st Australian Division was sent to raid Celtic Wood, a large broken copse containing many pillboxes. The idea was to create a diversion, but it was a disaster. Only 14 of the raiders got back, unwounded, some not until the next day. The missing men were never seen or heard of again. The names are not in any list of prisoners received during the war. The Graves Commission found no trace of their bodies. Other than a mysterious answer to this tragedy of World War I, it appears that the soldiers had been sucked down by the thick clay or had been vaporised by artillery fire, or maybe both. But what actually happened to the men is still only theory. It is hard to even locate the actual area that the men disappeared because, due to the constant artillery, had completely pulverised the area and everything was ploughed under. Celtic Wood had disappeared along with the Australian soldiers who never returned from it. The best that could be hoped for was that the missing men of Company C were prisoners, but as months passed, none of their names turned up on prisoner lists delivered to the International Red Cross. Yet, when Graves registration units worked through Celtic Wood a year later, after the Germans had retreated, they found neither graves nor scatterings of human remains. The records of the 448th Infantry Regiment contain no mention of the raid. For all anyone knew, 2/3 of Company C had simply vanished. In the decades that followed, and the area had long since returned to farmland, bones, like stones, tend to work their way to the surface, as the local farmers can testify. Battlefield archaeologists on the Western Front have spent a lot of time roaming the fields where Celtic Wood once stood, and have questioned the farmers who lived there. Even the oldest residents, he says, have no memory of human remains or military equipment having been dug up. 59 bodies could not have sunk so deeply into the mud as to stay undetected. So, what happened? Where did they go? There has been much theory and conjecture as to what happened, but no absolute answers.